Alright guys, so as we talked about yesterday in class, we started to introduce the very bare bones basics of 3D animation, and of course we're going to be using Blender as our software. It's a great piece of software, it's very fully functional, and as with all of our pieces of software for this class, it is super duper free. So if you haven't already, go ahead and download Blender. It's blender.org, and you can just download the app right there and load it up. It'll be good to go. Now, for the sake of this class, I've already downloaded an attached file. It's in our Dropbox, and I'll add a link in below the video here. But we've already got our little figurine here. It's already been modeled and rigged for us, and again, all attributes are down below. So if you think about 3D animation, it's a lot like stop motion animation, right? So we've got this character here, our little wooden maquette, and I can bend him and he'll stay in place, and I can move him a little bit more. If I wanted to make him animate, right, I would take him and I'd kind of move him a little bit, take a picture, move him a little bit, take another picture, and so on and so forth. And then whenever I played those photos back in a series of animations, usually 24 frames a second, then all of a sudden I'm going to get this thing moving and shaking, and it's look really, really cool. Just like with any kind of stop motion animation, think of like Wallace and Gromit or Nightmare Before Christmas, that kind of stuff. This, even though it's physically in our world, is very much like what we're doing here in the 3D animation world. Even though our version of our maquette is in the computer screen, at the end of the day, it's the same thing. I've got my figure, I'm going to move him a little bit, I'm going to set what's called a keyframe in place of taking a photograph, and then the computer is actually going to do all the in-betweening for us. So the stuff between the keyframes, or those photographs, it's going to make it nice and smooth and buttery for us, so it's really, really awesome. So, what the heck are we doing? Well, if you remember in class, I had you reach into our mystery bucket here, and you pulled out at random a piece of paper, and that had a verb or an action on it. In my case, I have kicking a soccer ball. So I have to find a way of animating my character doing this action, but the key is you don't want to tell anybody about it, because on the last day of class we're actually going to watch all of your videos and guess on how well your pantomime skills are, because our character has nobody else to interact with, has no soccer ball to actually kick. So just like if you were acting it out or being, like a mime in the streets of Chez Paris, you would have to act it out pretty well. So I'm going to teach you the bare bones, and I mean bare bones basics, of animating in Blender. Here's how it works. First things first, you need yourself an actual mouse. The reason is because this little center button, your scrolly wheel, is really important when it comes to moving around the screen. I'll show you what I mean. So, if I want to move around a little bit on this screen here, I'm going to click that actual center button. I can zoom, right? Whoa, right? I can zoom it, but if I click and I move around, whoa, you'll see it'll actually cause you to rotate your screen. Okay, so by clicking that little mouse wheel, I can rotate my screen, okay, like in a little semicircle. But if I hold down Shift and click that mouse wheel, all of a sudden I can move side to side or up and down. So kind of like if you're strafing back and forth or moving back and forth, right? So now I've got my X, Y, and Z axes, basically, right? So by using Shift, I can go back and forth a little bit like so. I can zoom out, I can rotate, and then I can zoom back in, and now I'm at a completely different angle. Whoa. Okay? Now remember that this is a three-dimensional object. Even though you're seeing it on a flat screen and it's stuck in there, at the end of the day, it's still a three-dimensional object. So you want to make sure as you're animating, not to just animate from one angle, but animate from other angles too. So even though it works this way, it might look horrible from another direction. So, as you're animating, remember to think about this as a three-dimensional object. The best way to go about that is to literally animate it just front on, make sure that it works, right? Save that animation, and then turn it. And now I'm going to work on it this way too. So think about it not as a three-dimensional object maybe, but more as a 2D object, a 2D object, a 2D object, and all these different angles. But make sure all those angles are good, and you're going to have a really good 3D object. Okay, so let's get you some bare bones basics here, okay? All right, so here we go. So we know how to move around now, basically using that scrolly wheel, right? I've got my regular left mouse click, and you'll see that kind of moves this little tiny reticle around the screen here. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But if I want to activate this guy, if I want to move his joints around, I'm actually going to use the other mouse button. That's this one here, the one on the right-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I can move his arm freely. Whoa, like that. Or if I wanted to, I can actually click with the left mouse. Again, we're kind of bouncing back and forth. I can click on these little up down, left, right arrows. If you think about it, these red, blue, and green little arrows here, these are basically your X, Y, and Z axes. So again, talking about having something kind of come in and out of action, right? It's pretty cool. Okay, so we've got our X, Y, and Z axes, and we can move this guy in three-dimensional space just like you do whenever you're walking through the hallway. And we can do that with all of his joints. Now, this particular guy has two different kinds of joints going on. If you look at his arms, he's actually got kind of 1, 2, and 3, just like you do in your own body. But if you look at his feet, they work a little bit differently. There's no actual bones in there. Instead, what we're going to do is I can actually move this foot, right? And if you think about, if you go to move your foot, you got to move your leg, right? So I can move his foot wherever I want it to. And then there's this little floaty square right here, right? What the heck is that? Well, that little floaty square actually dictates where his knee is pointing, right? So it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about things, right? So if I move the foot, that leg is going to go, and then I kind of gear the knee around where I want it to be. Cool? Okay. So you can always do Control Z to undo as well. That's regular stuff. Okay. So we're in pose mode, and I can jump around. I can actually change the view of my character. If I want to see just the right-hand side, if I want to see the left-hand side, it'll kind of show me all of that, like so. But for the sake of our project here, I want to see them in 3 dimensions. There we go. Other things, obviously, whenever you're using Blender, there's more than just modeling and posing in here. You can do a whole lot of different things, but for right now, we're just talking animation. So what happens if I don't really want to move my foot up and down so much as I want to rotate it, right? Well, I'm going to change those little XYZ arrows from here, the transformation, over to here, our rotate. So by clicking this little half circle, you'll see that changes, and now I can rotate that foot. Like so. Pretty cool. In all honesty, you'll probably use the rotate more than you will the actual up and down and left and right and all that. If you think about how you move, even though, yes, I can move my arms around, at the end of the day, I'm turning a whole lot more than I'm actually moving. It sounds a little goofy, but it works. Okay. Other than that, there's some other things you can think about. This one here actually makes things enlarge. We're not doing that. Your hands don't just magically get bigger. So we're going to stick with rotate and movement, okay? So we've got our position and our rotate going on. There's other things we can do as well. We can actually change our figure into more of a wireframe mesh. But again, for the sake of this example, we're sticking to solid. The last thing is down on the bottom here, you can see I've got this kind of little time bar, and this is our actual animation bar that we're working with. So depending on where I am, I'm going to want to set a keyframe, again, kind of like taking a photo, stopping that pose in time, and then I'm going to want to move throughout this timeline to create the animation. Stick with me, it sounds a little goofy, but to make your life a lot easier, instead of setting a keyframe every time, because in Blender you actually have to set a keyframe for every single joint, it gets old. Instead, what we're going to do is if you look down over there, there's a little red button. I'm going to click on that red button, and then I'm going to magically click on that key as well. What that's going to do is it's going to lock all of my keyframes for me. So anytime I move something, I'm going to get a little tiny yellow line, where my green line is currently. So the green one says where I'm at, and then the yellow one will say that there's a keyframe there. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and move something here. Maybe put his arms down so it doesn't look like he's standing at attention. Okay. Let me rotate this a little bit, make it look a little more comfortable, right? That looks pretty good. Okay, so I've got him kind of posed, and now you'll see that green line underneath of it, there's that little yellow line. Again, what that means is that that pose is locked in time. Now, timing is a whole different aspect of animation, which we'll talk in another video later on, but I've got my guy, he's posed, he's ready to go, and of course my word, if you remember, was kicking a soccer ball. So I have to find some way of bringing his leg back and forward, and then I have to think about weight distribution. There's a whole bunch of craziness going on here, but what I'm going to do is this. Notice that if I click on something else, say like his foot, that little tiny yellow line disappears, because again, the keyframes are only really set for his shoulders, okay? So don't be scared if something disappears on you just because you're moving around the body. So what I want to do is this. I'm going to set a keyframe here, and again, you can always set a keyframe manually if you'd like to. I can just set one from down here, or if I want to, I can actually hit I, and then I can set a keyframe that way. Or I can actually go in and use my little tools over on this side, and I can insert a keyframe that way. That's how you'll remove one as well. If along the way, let's say that you would like also to maybe copy a keyframe to use later on down the line, you can always go ahead and grab your keyframe, whichever yellow line you'd like to, and you can go through into pose and copy and paste pose there as well. So you can copy paste, you can delete, and you can add manually, or because we hit that little red dot, it'll do it automatically for us too. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a different notch on my timeline. I'm going to go ahead and move my character around here real quick. So I'm just going to freeform it. Let's see, now that looks pretty, oh, I lost his foot there. That looks pretty good, I think. But you know what? I want to rotate his foot like he's actually kicked something, so I'm going to rotate it as well. Right? I'm going to grab this knee because I want his knee a little more over here. Now, that looks like a foot kicking a ball, but here's the key. Remember, like I said, it's three-dimensional, right? So whenever I start rotating this around, how many times have you kicked a ball across your legs? Well, I have never done that, and that looks like a really awkward way to kick. So instead, I now have to move my foot back. Right, I can kind of move it forward again, and now I have to kind of reorganize what I was doing. So again, remember, thinking in 3D seems a lot easier than it actually is. Okay. Alright, so there's my foot, checking out in 3D, looks pretty cool. Okay, so everything looks pretty good. I'm happy-go-lucky. I've kicked my ball, and the foot has raised and lowered, right? So let's go ahead and put that foot right back where it was. Again, I want to make sure to rotate it a little bit. Whoa. Like so. I move him right back to where he was. Okay, so I've got keyframe number 1, him standing. Keyframe number, what are we on, number 7? You can see your keyframes right here, and he is kicked, right? So whenever I hit play, right over here, I should see his foot slowly rise. There you go. And that's it. And it's just going to go ahead and loop. Now the reason it holds there is because I haven't given it any other keyframes to do. It just holds on that pose. So if I want to put a foot back down, I'm going to have to make sure to add another keyframe where his foot goes back down. Like so. So again, now I have 3, right? 1, 2, 3, and I can see kind of the in-betweens in there. So whenever I hit play, he'll kick and put his foot down, kick and put his foot down, kick and put his foot down. Now, this is pretty robotic looking, and obviously you want to incorporate other aspects. And the best advice I can give you about animation is get up and animate yourself. I know you feel like a goober doing it, but stand and actually kick a ball. See what moves and shifts whenever you do it, and put that into your character. So, even though it's on the computer, even if it was here in person, at the end of the day, we're still bringing life to an inanimate object. That's animation. If you need anything else, talk to me in class, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how we're going to render this using a camera next time.